Parents who decided to kick their children out of the house. What was the reason and do you have regrets? Serious. I moved my 17-year-old bipolar daughter out of my house and into my mother's house after an argument between us where she threatened to kill her then unborn brother. I was 16 weeks pregnant and she threatened to kick me in the stomach. She lifted her foot too. That was my breaking point. She also almost punched her then 7-year-old sister in the face during a temper tantrum and threw a Blu-ray player across the room. That was the beginning of the end. The above all happened in one night. Police were called. She tried to have me arrested. It sucked. After she left we discovered a hole in her mattress and approximately 45 of her bipolar medicine pills stuffed in there. My husband and I tried for 7 years. She started showing signs of mental illness at 10 years old. To help her, she went to a psych ward for children when she was 15. Therapists, medication. In the end I had to choose between her and the two little ones. It wasn't fair to them. Their home was a war zone because of their sister. I have no regrets. My younger daughter has some lingering issues from living with her sister and my son doesn't even know that's his sister. I had to protect them too. It wasn't easy and I wish she would stop but she won't. Sadly she is now 21, a mother herself, and still refuses to take her meds. She literally lives in her own little world. She's been homeless and using methamphetamines. I have my grandson with me currently and we have another court date coming soon. I supervise her visits with her son because the court found her to be a danger to her own child. You are a good mom and an amazing grandma. No matter how much you love your child, there's only so many times you're going patch holes in the walls because your kid throws a ridiculous raging tantrum. Only so many times you're going to tell them not to smoke pot in your house. Only so many times you're going to tolerate threats of violence. There comes a point, 18th birthday in my case, where you've done what you can to provide for them and help them grow up, and it is time for them to understand the alternative to being provided for. It sucks to go through, but it was for everyone's benefit. No one has to follow my crazy rules. Don't use drugs in my house. Don't threaten me. Don't break things. Use basic manners. And I have peace in my home. Our relationship has improved significantly, too. I kicked my oldest son out for one night and he left for good. He was 18. Just graduated high school. He was really berating his little brother, again, and it nearly came to blows. My younger son has extreme anger issues but has worked on them so that he is more balanced than most adults. I broke them out and the older boy let into me. He said all the hurtful things that only your spouse or child would know. I'll admit some of the things he said were based in reality. At one point he leaned into me and did everything he could to make me swing at him. I have a temper too. I didn't. I told he had to leave for the night. He often spent the night at a buddy's. He grabbed his L computer that we just bought him and some clothes and left. I stood immobilized for half an hour, stunned and hurt but in control. Anyway, he got a PT job and paid rent to his friend's parents and lived there. We reached out to him several times. Finally, months later in the fall, he talked to his mother and sister and avoided me. It had been cold and he takes the bus, so I dug out some old wool socks and long underwear for him. He looked shocked. He comes around more often now. Always brings donuts or something. Gave us all nice presents at Christmas. I let him use my car while I was out of town, and he brought it back washed and detailed. I still get anxious about him because he isn't in school or even gotten a full-time job yet, but I sure love him. Tell him you love him. I didn't kick her out, but I told her that if she wouldn't follow the rules she could carry her butt. Her choice. She left. I can't really say I had regrets, but I hated that it had come to that. I briefly felt like a failure as a parent, but short of zombifying her, there was no way to reason with her or make her follow the house rules. And no, the house rules weren't unreasonable. I took on as a foster son a 10-year-old kid whose mother kicked him out of the house because her new boyfriend didn't want any kids around. He had no wardrobe to speak of, so the first thing I did was take him shopping for clothes. He had a spotty school attendance record, so I made sure he went to school every day by driving him there and then picking him up after school to take him to an after-school program at the local Y. Picked him up at the Y after work, got him a good dinner, then helped him with his school work. His grades improved dramatically. Saw him graduate from high school and put him through college. Many years later, after retiring from my job, I started looking for a retirement home for myself. My son wouldn't allow that to happen and insisted that I move in with him and his family. Several years have gone by and I'm still here with him and his family. Life is good. I know you're not supposed to believe anything on the internet, but I hope this is a real story. I kicked my 23-year-old out of my house. He refused to get any kind of job and didn't do anything around the house like clean up after himself or basic chores. Pretty much spent all day playing computer games and commenting on 4chan. I pretty much gave him 6 months notice, but it didn't make any difference. Finally dropped him off at an emergency shelter. Eventually he got a place and then decided to move west to be with his internet girlfriend. That didn't work out. Currently homeless on the west coast. I wish I didn't have to do that, but he was causing too many problems at my house and was beginning to steal stuff. That's tough, no doubt. On one hand, you don't want your kids to fail. On the other hand, making them homeless wrenches their heart, I bet. Not the parent but an older sibling, by 10 years. Brother was adopted at 3.5. Addict mother, had been in over 40 different foster homes. Abuse of every kind, neglect, malnourishment. My parents were told he was developmentally disabled, but it was actually a delay due to neglect and malnourishment. He turned out to actually be pretty smart. Due to adopting a disabled child, all his medical expenses were paid for by the state. He saw multiple doctors, got multiple diagnoses, some of which we didn't agree with, like ADHD, a whole cocktail of meds, some of which turned out to be contraindicated for each other. Bipolar seemed the most correct, but at the time, few doctors believed that anyone under 18 could be bipolar. I don't know if it would have made a difference if he'd been treated for bipolar earlier. My dad died suddenly when my brother was 17. At the time, he was in a residential school treatment center. They discharged him. He managed to graduate from high school. His behavior was all over the place, endangering my mother and himself. My mother told him that he could get a job and follow the rules of the house. Extremely reasonable. Mom is almost too accommodating. Imo. Or she'd give him seed money of $1,000, same as my other brother and I got when we moved out, and she'd take him wherever he wanted to go. He took the money, went to New York to find his birth family, not a closed adoption. We knew who they were. Sadly, a family of drug addicts and sellers. Last I heard he was in prison for selling drugs, B&E, debauchery, and a list of other stuff short of murder, and is not likely to ever get out. Got kicked out at age 20 for smoking weed. Never did it in the house, but they found some in my car. I was halfway done with engineering school with good grades and a job. I told them I would leave right after my laundry was done, but they called the cops immediately and had me dragged out of the house. Literally threw all my crap into a suitcase and 2 trash bags and headed out. I managed to finish school and get an even better job and I'm fine now. I have old school Arab parents who are totally against smoking and drinking, which I understand, I guess. I knew my boundaries and never let it interfere with my life goals though, so I think it was an overreaction. My godmother kicked her daughter out because she got pregnant at 14. The results came back only a week before her 15. Hispanic sweet 16. Everything was paid for and ready to go, so they still let her have the party. She had her party and was kicked out a few days later. Moved in with her baby daddy's parents. Had 3 more kids by 20. Baby daddy cheated and moved out. She stayed with his parents because her parents still won't take her back but will always babysit when baby daddy's parents can't and she needs to go party. I kinda feel that had they cancelled everything, even if they would lose most of the money already put in for the party, it would have been that small little wake up call she needed. I mean, she is a great mom except for when she goes out to party. Kids are great too. Good grades etc, but I think that comes from the baby daddy's parents' involvement. She's still a kid going on 30. When my dad introduced his new girlfriend, it was obvious she and I were not going to get along well. Having clashing personalities, beliefs, and experiences, it was hard to relate to this woman I barely knew. Over the years it never escalated beyond her disinterest in me and the petty comments made about my life, comparing me to her daughters, and I agree in hindsight I probably didn't help the situation, but it still hurts that my dad turned a blind eye, as he obviously loved her. When they married, my dad insisted we move in with them, as she owned the house she was in and we were just renting. I was hesitant but knew this would make my dad happy. Didn't even last a month before she asked my dad to tell me to get out. Didn't even have the gall to say it to me herself. I angrily agreed and have since lived with housemates. He was soon asked to leave as well. They fought too much about what is and isn't shared, so they decided to live separately until they could buy a house together. My older brother moved out with him. Maybe to keep him company? I don't know. I was banned from family get-togethers. 3 years later, my dad finally found a house. They just moved in about 2 weeks ago, and my brother is going through the same as I did. Her comments, attitudes, and disrespect is getting to be too much. I think now my dad sees that the problem is not us, but her. We have coffee once a week and he apologized for how he handled the situation. Said he regrets kicking me out in her favor as that has not only ruined our relationship, but my relationship with anyone in the direct family. Let's just hope he handles it better with my brother this time. He was being mostly worthless. Drugs. Bad crowd. Didn't care about school. Would bring his friends over and help them steal from me. Of course, at 17 he knew everything. So the morning he turned 18, I gave him the opportunity to prove it. It took 15 years or so before he figured out he was freaking up bad. Had been in and out of jail. Still on drugs. Finally decided to clean himself up. Now he went back to school, got a decent paying job and is doing well. I would say it was the best thing for both of us. My 18-year-old son took all my credit cards and booked a full paid trip to Maui with his newly found 33-year-old girlfriend. He screwed my credit. My eldest, who for all intent and purposes is mine despite me getting him slightly used when his mother upgraded her hubby package to me, was attending a fairly decent college. He was getting a discount because both his mother and I worked there. This isn't easy. There is a long history of his behavior for reasons I don't want to get into. Anyway, the straw that broke the camel's back was this. He was very ill and was not doing well in classes. He had some viral infection that I can't, for the life of me, remember what it was. He had missed multiple classes and yet, when I came to work with his meds he was missing from campus. Where was he? Why? He was attending homecoming with his high school sweetie. We cut all extra funding and moved him out of our house. He had his school and meal plan paid for, but the cell phone, incidental cash, and everything else, done. He immediately went around and told everyone how awful we were, how terrible we treated him. While we paid his schooling, he did everything in his power to smear my name with professionals I worked with at the time. To my co-workers and acquaintances' credit, they knew me better than my son, who was also working in a similar field, firefighter, with first responder and eventually EMT goals. But it still was horribly embarrassing as he aired dirty laundry, both real and imagined, just because he got in trouble for going to a dance while sick, after missing classes, with a girl we hated. Incidental, really. Later, after she dumped him, he ended up with another girl. We were cordial to him, and he told us how she got pregnant. Oddly enough, her pregnancy lasted 13 months. He's now married to her, miserable, and has 2 children we are not allowed to see. This was the culmination of years and years of behavior. And yet, if I could change anything, it would be this. Because he wouldn't be 2,500 miles away, miserable, and responsible for 2 children that deserve so much better. Thanks for sharing. My stepdaughter, 16, was increasingly inappropriate towards me, would be overly physical and make sure to walk by and flash me after a shower or would covertly try and get herself off under the covers while I would be sitting on her bed talking with her. Then when I made clear her advances were not appreciated she would tell lies about me to her adult sister, how I hugged her too long, or tried to look at her naked. She forced me to, or how I pulled the covers off her while she was naked. Never happened. She also lied constantly, stole, slept around with older men and was failing every class in school because she would constantly skip to sleep with guys in the parking lot and smoke pot before having a friend drive her home. And she was toxic in the household and disrespected her mom and me constantly. I couldn't handle her being a terrible influence on her younger sisters and finally sent her off to live with her bio dad, who isn't the best person but loved the idea of taking her in. He has since regretted it and asks us constantly to take her back. Fortunately she's almost 18 now and is dating some 25-year-old guy, so she will probably be moving out with him soon. As a 17-year-old my mother kicked me out of the house. We didn't speak for about 4 years. When I asked her if she regrets it, she explained that it might not have been a great decision but she's happy with how things turned out, so she doesn't regret it. It's a very her response. My feelings are that she regrets that it was done in anger, and that we missed those years. I got kicked out of my parents' house 3 days after I turned 19. I had a tough time with my first semester of college and decided to not sign up for more classes in the spring. I had switched my availability to anytime and was becoming a full-time employee and planned on moving out to another town to go to a better school and separate myself from my parents. Because I felt my problem had been college felt so close to high school while living there. I hadn't consulted my parents because I knew they wouldn't like it and had planned on telling them when classes would have started. My dad found out and we fought and argued. He told me I couldn't live there anymore if I wasn't going to school. I ended up moving in with my uncle and following through with my plan on going to another college. I can't say whether they regret what happened, but they do seem sad whenever I mention stuff that happened when I moved. I don't regret what I did, but I do regret how I acted when we fought. There are things that can never be unsaid or taken back. My buddy KB was kicked out by his parents just after he turned 17. He was a very bright and emotional dude, but had dropped out of high school and was running with some scuzzy crap freaks. He got P when they found some of his C and flushed it. He then backed out of a family vacation and threw an unruly house party while the family was out of town, trashing the house entirely and causing thousands of dollars in damage. I was not there, so they basically told him to frick right off and go live with his friends. I would stop by every week or two and hang out with his mom, giving her updates on his whereabouts and well-being. They eventually patched things up and he re-enrolled second semester of senior year, and by some miracle managed to graduate on time with the rest of us. He is now in grad school and has a tighter relationship with his family than anyone else I know. Every once in a while he mentions how much my visits meant to his mom. Parents kicked me out in high school because I had 4 classes that were B's and 2 were F's. They've never been strict on my grades but manipulated it into a reason to teach me a lesson. I lived with my best friend's family for 5 months before I didn't want to intrude anymore. Moved back in with my parents, which was absolutely horrible. Our relationship was and always will be fricked because of it. Now I work at my dream job at age 19, about to get my degree in business marketing and am making more than my father. It's a sweet taste, but I wish our relationship was better. Hard to do that when they reject my every try. Not the parent but the kid here, but I'll tell my story. When I was 16, a week from my 17th birthday, my mom called me. I had been out on a babysitting gig over the weekend and told me I had to move out by Monday and it was Sunday. When I asked why, she didn't tell me at first, but after the 3rd or 4th time I repeated the question she admitted it was because my sister was moving back home. My sister is about 2 years older than me, and saying we don't get along would be an understatement. She had been moved out for about 6 months at that point, so I asked why she was moving back. Oh, she's pregnant. Okay, makes sense. She was living on the streets and drinking and partying her disability paycheck away within the first week of each month, and I understood that the only chance the baby would be if sibling did move home. Honestly though, that's not the entire truth, but it's the one she ran with. There was also the fact that my parents were foster parents and only allowed 6 dependents in the home. Because my nibbling would put them over the limit, they would have to give up one of the foster kids, which would make them have smaller paychecks. May as well get rid of the kid not making them as much money, right? I'm 24 now and I haven't had contact with them for 3.5 years, and there is a lot more to the story than just what I've written. But at one point, maybe a year after I moved out, my mom admitted that she regretted me moving out because I was such a great helper, aka essentially ran the entire farm for her and did so much of the housework without being asked, while elder sister was lazy and literally wouldn't help out without throwing a fit. Violated at 4 by uncle. Violated physically shamed prolongedly from 8-12 by another uncle. Soap. Stepdad starts pimping me out around 12ish. Start doing heroin. Lots of it. 4 years. Be me. 15. Pretty much failing the frick out of life because I'm a failing. heavily medicated student, and a teenage H by night. Average 4-6 hours of sleep week. Get prescribed sleeping pills for my bombing grades. Clearly it's insomnia. Life is normal for 3 months. Then I start waking up with my stepdad on top of me in the middle of the night. He had me committed. First to a mental hospital, then a delinquent center for girls. Even convinced my doctor's mentors my own goddamn mother to get I was freaking confusing fantasy with reality. Skip to age 16. Few months before 17. Stepdad is on M, or crack, wasn't sure which, and C. He violates me again, but this time I didn't take the freaking pills. This time I whip out a knife and threaten him. My little sibling is immediately relocated cause now, on top of an incest-obsessed liar, I'm violent. Except, see, my mom caught him this time. My sister, unbeknownst to him, was relocated because I told mom we had to protect her. I had to protect her. I had a plan. That plan failed when the cops arrested my mother on a 20-year-old charge and left me with the man I called to tell them was violating me. He put me in the hospital after slamming the heavy front door on various parts of my body. Fast forward again, mom's home now and I've been expelled from the whole county school district for missing 2/3 RD of a school hour. Stepdad kicks me and mom out in a blazing glory. No, literally, he burned all of our belongings. What clothes shoes were salvaged were slightly crisped and forever scented of betrayal and loathing. Now, I'm 16, homeless with my mom, and prostituting again to feed us, all while hiding it from mom. I relapse into hard drugs. We lived like that a year and a half before my underage but managed to get knocked up and catch us a meal ticket. Funny life, I ended up with a man I truly love, in a beautiful home, without beautiful child. My life is nice now. My mom has a little home of her own now, and my sister will never know the molestation and beatings I saved her from, and she hates me for it. Mom has personally told me she regrets ever being blinded by her ex-husband, more so because I suffered for it. As a small note, my mother has several mental disabilities, and did not notice the in-house abuse because of it. As for him, he still thinks he's right. My sister still loves him, and I recently made an anonymous report to DHR and other CPS lines to alert them to the fact his girlfriend has small girls. His world keeps turning, so I try to let mine turn too. I didn't get kicked out as much as I moved out. Back in, back out. My mother was an alcoholic, going through a 1/5 of gin very day, and I was about 15. My dad would leave early for work and come home late at night, leaving me to deal with her. The problem was that she was a mean drunk and she would dish out physical abuse. I had enough and moved in with my grandmother, her mother, which my mother would find embarrassing and then would sober up, call and tell me to come home. This happened a couple of times. Finally one too many times, and I moved out for good. My mother called and told me to come home, and I told her no. My mother passed away when I was 16 due to cirrhosis of the liver. I had a pretty decent relationship with my dad, so I moved back home until after graduation from high school and I went into the military. 1960s, and I've been on my own since. I got kicked out on my 18th birthday. 1 month before that, my parents told me what was happening after I became a legal adult. I was to begin paying their full rent, and that I would have to drop out of high school with only 6 months left to graduate. I would have to get a full-time job, pay half of the utilities, and provide my own food, and submit myself for routine drug testing. I was also not going to get keys, not allowed to have anyone over, and would be locked out if I wasn't home by a certain time. And I couldn't be home alone. If one of them wasn't there, I couldn't be. And they installed a security system 6 months beforehand to ensure that I couldn't break into my own house. My relationship with my parents wasn't a bad one. It simple didn't exist. They were and are to this day a couple of the most selfish, egotistical, self-centered morons that I have had the displeasure of knowing. I had essentially stopped interacting with them when I was 16. They assumed that this was due to drug use, hence the aforementioned drug testing. I wasn't a perfect child teenager, but was far from the worst. I had a part-time job and a friend offered a place to stay until I graduated. Saturday before my birthday, I rented a storage closet. On my birthday, I spent the day at school working the administration so that I could begin signing my own consent forms for items and removing my parents from contact lists. The condition for this was that I had to maintain a C average. Not a problem. I didn't have a car or a license, but another good friend offered to drive me home so that I could move everything out. I was used to having to pack up and move at any moment, so there wasn't much. Filled my storage room and rode my bicycle to where I would be staying. That night I slept on a mattress for the first time in 5 years and was the first time I was allowed to watch TV in 3. It was The Simpsons. To this day, I haven't had to pay the amount of rent that they would have forced me to, even when I was eventually living alone. As for the parents, they are currently living in the basement of my stepfather's parents' house, squatting and waiting for that to die. I haven't talked to them or seen them in years. A kid in one of my classes back in high school was kicked out the day he turned 18. He used to sleep in his truck out in the parking lot before school and shower there during lunch. His parents came out and said he was an butthole who treated them like crap and they wanted no part of him if he was going to act like that. Being an butthole, none of the teachers would even invite him to stay with them and he just limped through graduation working at Arby's and sleeping in his truck. Just making sure people know when I say being an butthole I mean having a loud mouth, wanting to start fights if you upset him in any way, would steal stuff if he could, and frick. I googled his name and he was sentenced to serve 2 years in prison on 4 counts of drug-related charges a couple years back. I had to put several children out. They were in the mid-20s and doing drugs and stealing from us. I gave them many warnings and when they began stealing the vehicles and driving them without permission, I'd had it. I gave them money and put them on a bus for another state. They were homeless for a while, then got their act together. Now they are in school and supporting themselves while they work to become something. They have goals and a future. Best thing I ever did. Now, with that said, it was also the most painful thing I ever did and there wasn't a night that I didn't worry about them. Fortunately, they had a phone so I was able to keep in touch with them and ensure they were safe. Eventually, they came to understand and even agree with my actions. Our relationship is very good now and I'm very proud of them. My fiance's sister was removed from her house at 16, a runaway that they made her learn the hard way. She was adopted, they all are. Doesn't matter though, parents had rules and she had it in her nature to rebel to do her thing. Had kids with another guy, got engaged, cheated and kids are all over. Parents had to shun her again because of her actions. She's old enough and we've all discussed with her how this isn't okay but she's gonna do her thing. Not my sister but I only got involved BC of her kids, they don't deserve to see this behavior. When I was 4, my mother married my stepdad. He suffers from manic depression and is bipolar. The guy grew up in a family of abusers. His abusive ways carried to me and my mother. He would cheat on my mother and call her W along with other awful names in front of family. She always acted as his shield from my family. One day he slit his wrists to try to deal with his pain. He was locked up in a psychiatric hospital for several months in suicide watch. After that things go worse. Him and I would get in arguments which resulted in me getting beaten. He would belittle me constantly. My mother started to become abusive towards me. When I was 15 or 16, my grandmother was at my house visiting. We got in a heated argument. I finally had enough and raised my fists in defense. He kicked me out as my mother stood and watched. My grandparents took me in. It damaged me a great deal. I barely finished high school. I suffered from depression for a long time. My parents deny the whole situation to this day. They made up lies to tell the rest of the family. My cousin's kids ask me bogus questions about why I chose to leave. Still upsets me but I stay away from them. I have a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old and this thread is honestly scaring the ever-loving crap out of me. I got kicked out at age 18 for fricking my girlfriend. Then I moved into a flea-bitten dump of an apartment for a few months before I moved back in with them 8 months later for school and cheaper rent. They felt like they were teaching me a lesson. I'm still freaking a decade later so I guess it didn't teach me much more than how to pay bills online and do e-banking. And I'm still a slob. I would have to be pretty desperate at this point to move in with them now. My mother was nuts and abusive and she kicked me out when I was 16 and I hitchhiked out of town for a weekend and returned. It shocked her when I left, but it gave me time to plan my departure. On my 18th birthday I walked out the front door, suitcase in hand with a place to go. My dad kicked me out multiple times simply BC his third wife didn't like me and had 4 other daughters. My mom and I got into a fist fight BC she punched me so I punched back and she burned almost all my stuff. So after getting kicked out of my dad's living with my mom getting kicked out of there and back to my dad again after about another 3-4 years at my dad's I ended up essentially running away and moving in with my BF and his mom. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.